Hijos de Newton, ¿cómo están? Hoy súper feliz porque les voy a compartir uno de los momentos más emocionantes de mi carrera como divulgador. De todas las personas que han influido en mi carrera, y yo esto lo he contado varias veces, hay tres que son, para mí, los grandes genios que me han mostrado el camino o a lo que yo me quería parecer en mi profesión de divulgación. Uno, ya lo saben, Hawking, el otro es Michio Kaku. Me faltaba por conocer la tercera persona, que de los tres, para mí, es el que mejor divulga. Yo siempre lo he observado como un modelo. Para mí, parecerme a él era como el camino verdaderamente a seguir. De estos tres, para mí, es el que lo explica de forma más clara, el que pone mejor los ejemplos y el que encuentra siempre esa analogía con la que acabas con la sensación de que lo has comprendido todo. Su libro, El Universo Elegante, así como la serie de documentales, yo los veía cuando era joven, pegado a la pantalla y muy emocionado. Y siempre me ha parecido la forma ideal de aproximarse al conocimiento científico. Es para mí un verdadero referente dentro del mundo de la divulgación. Pero es más, lo que yo no esperaba es que la conversación con él fluyera tan bien. Tuve el lujo, dentro del marco del festival Starmus en Bratislava, muchas gracias a los organizadores y en particular a Breso por darme esta oportunidad tan magnífica, me dieron la posibilidad de charlar con él durante una hora, lo que yo quisiera, con esta persona tan especial que sabe tanto de física, un teórico de cuerdas que ha divulgado en los escenarios más importantes del mundo. Tenía una hora para preguntarle lo que a mí me apeteciera. Así como surge lo que para mí, como dije anteriormente, es la conversación más interesante que he tenido yo en mi carrera divulgativa. La verdad es que le pude preguntar todas esas cosas que yo tenía guardadas en una conversación que yo creo que fue verdaderamente profunda y muy intensa. Y hoy, amigos y amigas, les traigo esta conversación a todos ustedes. Para los que aman la física, para los que aman el conocimiento, yo creo que es una hora de orgasmo intelectual. De verdad, creo que lo van a disfrutar como nunca. Así que no me queda más que agradecer a Brian Greene, primero, por haber accedido a concederme esta hora de conversación, a Starmus por haber intercedido entre Brian Greene y yo, y por supuesto a todos ustedes, porque desde luego que si no tuviera este proyecto compartido con ustedes, pues estas oportunidades, que bueno, son oportunidades profesionales pero también personales, para mí es un gozo máximo poder conversar con personas así y entender mejor la forma en que ven las cosas, pues, imagínense, como un testigo directo. Así que muchas gracias a todos ustedes por darme esta oportunidad. Ahora sí que sí, les dejo con esta hora de conversación en Bratislava, dentro del marco de Starmus, con uno de los mejores divulgadores científicos del mundo. Su nombre, Brian Greene. Adelante y disfruten.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Greene, how are you doing here?
Doing well.
Great. So for me it's an honor to talk about you about many different things.
Thank
but
you.
I wanted to start with string theory. You are a string theoretician.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how do you feel the theory is today after this revolution? Is it stuck or how do you feel it is now?
Definitely not stuck. Certainly if you listen to the chatter that you hear online from some of the people who love to take down anything that's gotten prominence, which we see in the world, you would get the impression that the theory is stuck. But the theory is moving forward at a breakneck speed toward deeper understanding of space and time and the mathematical structure of the theory. What we are stuck on, and it's not the theory that's stuck, but we're stuck on being able to test these ideas because they come into their own in a domain that is so energetic on scales that are so incredibly tiny that even the Large Hadron Collider, our most powerful machine at CERN, it does not have the capacity to directly probe the ideas of the theory. So if you ask me, do I know if the theory is right or wrong, I would say, I'm going to give you the same answer that I would have given to you when I was a graduate student in the 1980s. We don't know. But if you ask me, do we understand the theory fantastically more deeply than we did than when I was a graduate student? Incredibly more rich understanding. So that's really where the state of play is at the moment.
Were you upset with LHC not finding anything like a supersymmetry? How was this failing supersymmetry affecting the theory?
Yeah, upset is an interesting word. I wouldn't say I was upset because I am not wedded to the theory being right or being wrong. I just want to know the truth. And so had we found supersymmetric particles, it would have been one piece of circumstantial evidence that these ideas are correct. Because string theory, as you know, the full name is superstring theory, and the super refers to this quality called supersymmetry, which demands that for every known particle, there's another partner particle that we've yet to actually see in nature. Had we seen those particles in nature, say at the Large Hadron Collider, we would have said, yes, this is really all coming together. Having not seen them, number one, we haven't ruled out supersymmetry. It could simply exist at higher energy scales. But having not found it, it just leaves us in the same state of unknown. So would I have been happier had we found supersymmetry? Yeah, if I'm being honest, it would have been more in line with what we had hoped and expected. But nature doesn't care what we hope or we expect. And why should the mass of these particles be sufficiently low that this one particular machine that we happen to be able to build in Geneva, Switzerland, is the right machine to capture them? So there were many reasons to think that we wouldn't find the particles. We haven't found the particles. We keep on going, and perhaps we'll find them in a more powerful machine, or maybe even we'll find a more clever indirect way to test these ideas in the future.
This indirect test of the theory, which one do you think is the closest, and which will be the machine? Will be a bigger accelerator, astroparticles?
Yeah.
Or how do you think it will be?
I don't think a bigger machine is necessarily, because then you just push the frontier, another factor of 10, right? There are many, many factors of 10 between where we are and sort of the maximum energy that we would anticipate these particles requiring. So go one more factor of 10, sure, maybe we'll get lucky. Astrophysical measurements certainly had me very excited some years ago. We did studies of possible imprints of a shortest length scale on the microwave background radiation, and that's a quality of string theory. And there are some indirect tests that you might find there. We've not found any evidence there as yet. I like the idea of deviations from Newton's inverse square law on very short scales, indicating extra dimensions of space, another quality of the theory. People have done some experiments. Some other experiments are on the docket to perhaps be carried out in the future. That's a possibility. Which is most likely? That's a question of betting and odds. Who knows? We just don't know. But again, the bottom line is, even if they all fail, it will simply be, we're back in the situation of the theory being too energetic and too small in its distance scales over which the predictions are likely to be found for us to test them with today's technology. It's a technology question as opposed to a problem with the theory.
And the theory, as I have understood, is incomplete.
Well, yes, definitely a work in progress. Again, the theory began, depending on where you place the history, in the late 1960s, right? So that's almost 60 years ago. Why is it taking so long, some people ask. Or some people say, you string theorists, you said 40 years ago that you were on the verge of having everything. And even at the time, those who were more mature in their approach to talking about these ideas, we were young and silly, perhaps, back then in our level of excitement. Because the older, more mature physicists, they knew this is a big program. You're trying to put gravity and quantum mechanics together. You're trying to have the unified theory. This is not something that you're going to solve overnight. And so the fact that we've been working on it all these decades and having not gotten stuck, which is your first question and the vital one, suggests to me that this is a fruitful, dynamic, and deeply promising approach to answering these questions. And so, yes, for sure. Do we always want to have the final form of the mathematics in hand? That's what we're working toward. But I'd say the most impactful research over the last few years has been understanding the nature of space and time much more deeply than we had before. We now think that the paradigm that we often say, you need to put gravity and quantum mechanics together, that may be the wrong way of saying it. In string theory, gravity and quantum mechanics may already be so profoundly intertwined that you can't even speak about one without the other. In other words, gravity may fundamentally have quantum physics already built in, and it's up to us to figure out how to understand that. This is a radically new way of thinking about the unification program, and it's where the math of string theory has taken us.
Is it probably that you need new mathematics as well, the mathematics that are not yet invented?
We certainly have found at various junctures that to be the case. Einstein built up his general theory of relativity using the mathematics from the 1800s. The ideas of Riemannian geometry that comes from Riemann and from Gauss and from Lobachevsky. And he was very lucky. He didn't have to invent new mathematics. He had to go to the math library, pull out the books on what we now call differential geometry, get his friend Marcel Grossman to teach him how to understand the mathematics, and then apply it to this physical theory. That is not in any way to take anything away from the genius of Einstein in being able to do that, but the math was already there. What we're finding is that for certain problems, the math is not already there. History is such that we need to be the ones pushing the mathematics. And what we have been able to do is partially push that program forward. There's a whole arena that vaguely is called quantum geometry that was never developed by the mathematicians because there was no motivation for the kinds of mathematical tools that string theory is requiring of us. So there are huge arenas of mathematical thought that have emerged from the study of string theory. I was part of one of those from the early days, an area called mirror symmetry, a new way of talking about geometrical shapes. And so yes, part of the challenge and part of why it's taking decades and decades is we can't simply go to the math library, pull out the book and find the right mathematics. We have to be pushing the frontiers.
And there are also critics about the string theory.
Are there?
Yeah. I was thinking of probably Liesmolin or
Yeah.
And they have another proposals, and also Rovelli. I think they have an interesting idea.
Yeah.
What do you think about this idea of the loop gravity? Or
I'm very happy that there are people working on many different approaches because I'm not one of those people who feels like you need to own an area of intellectual thought. Everybody should pursue what they find interesting and exciting, and Lee is a great guy, and Carlo, you know, great personality, great physicist. We've had conversations of this sort, and it's all wonderful. But do I think what they're doing is the right approach? I don't. If I did, I'd be working on that approach. And so I think it's fruitful. And maybe interesting intersections between their approach and our approach will emerge as we go forward. But no, I don't think it's the right way of going forward. But sure, the more the merrier in terms of putting ideas out there and let the community debate and discuss and critique and see where it goes.
Uh-huh. But you also play in your last book with philosophy. What's the point of philosophy with the string theory? Do you think yourself as a reductionist? Do you think there is a final theory that explains everything, and with this theory we can understand everything in the universe?
Well, I am a reductionist for sure, in the sense that I do think that we are governed by laws that fundamentally operate on small things. The ingredients that make us up. Do we know what those ingredients are as yet? We don't. We have some of those ingredients probably en route to the deepest understanding that I do think will emerge at some point. I do think at some point we'll say, here's the stuff, here are the laws. Will that be the end of science? Of course not. Then we'll build up reality from the stuff and the laws, and that will be a journey that will probably take us until the end of time or until the end of our species. And so, to me, the beauty of science is that it touches on the deep questions. It's not just calculate the magnetic moment of the electron, calculate that cross-section so we could predict the Higgs particle at CERN, something that you're deeply aware of. Rather, those are important ingredients, but I want to know, like, why are we here, or how are we here, or where are we going to be in, 10 to the 20 or 10 to the 50 years? To me, I want to understand the large picture of reality, and that's what science is all about. And that's why I wrote Until the End of Time, because my motivation for doing science was never really just to find the workings. My motivation was to try to feel connected to the world, the universe, the cosmos, the deep questions of life and existence, and I think we're getting insight into those kind of questions, and that's what really excites me.
And these connections with reality is something that we can call intuition. Is there something like faith over there? How do you feel this connection, and what's the role of this connection in your work in physics?
Yeah, well, intuition is a powerful tool that we humans employ to try to figure out which direction to go, which direction feels right. But ultimately, we know that intuition is a poor guide to the nature of the world. No one's intuition would have ever suggested quantum physics. The data suggested quantum physics, and then brilliant thinkers had to go against their intuition and develop these weird ideas of probability and interference and tunneling and entanglement that no one would have ever thought based on their intuition. And so, yes, it's a good tool, but it's a limited tool. And when it comes to faith, it depends exactly what you mean. I have a certain belief or confidence in mathematics as a tool for understanding the world. I also recognize there's limitations because these tools tell us about the external world, about objective reality, objective qualities of whatever the world is made of and how it behaves. There are subjective truths that matter to us too, and faith, for many people, is part of their subjective worldview. And if in their subjective worldview they can be happier, or they can feel more purpose or meaning or more fulfilled by imagining things that conflict with objective reality, God bless you. If that works for you, it works for me. There are things that I hold in my mind that I know are not true, and yet I hold on to them because they make my world a better place. I don't allow them to dictate my behavior in the external world. I don't deny climate change. I don't deny vaccines or science, because the objective world, science is our best tool. But inside my head, when I try to understand my life and meaning, is it solely based on objective truths about the objective world? Of course not. And so we need to be open-minded in the kinds of things that allow human beings to be able to persist and live. And so the scientist who says, throw away religion, it's wrong, objectively wrong, who cares? It's not meant to tell us about the objective world. It's something that's good for some people at connecting them to a larger scheme that allows them to persist in a meaningful way. And for that purpose, it does a great job for some people.
Isn't it compatible, what you say, with saying that probably there is more than just physics?
Well, it depends what one means by more. If you talk about the external world, I don't think there's more than physics. I don't think there's something hovering above the stuff and the laws. But if you allow us to recognize that the stuff and the laws can build a biological gadget called the human brain, which has this amazing ability to imagine and to create and to build fictional stories and narratives and wonderful ideas that allow us to persist, is that more than the physical? It's generated by the physical, it comes from the physical, but I would say that it enriches the physical. It doesn't transcend the physical, it's a product of the physical. And so having respect for what the mind is able to create is something that we should all have.
I think I can guess your answer, but anyways, I will try it.
Sure.
One of your book, I got like a spiritual crisis because of this free will. And as if I understood you correctly, physics says that free will doesn't exist and it's just an illusion. Is it correct?
That is correct. I mean, it's a debatable point, but the argument doesn't require knowing much about physics at all, as you've seen in the description. It's merely the statement that if you recognize and people can debate this, but if you recognize that our behaviors and our thoughts and our decisions are nothing but the product of particle motion inside of our brains, right? A decision to go left or right is my brain having processes that say left or right. If I move my arm, it's particles, muscles contracting and expanding that allow that motion. It's all just the motion of the fundamental ingredients. And those motions are fully determined, guided by physical law. There's no opportunity for any of us to intercede and say, laws, stop for a second. I'm thinking, let me make a decision. Don't do anything, laws. Okay, I've made a decision. Now you can continue to determine what happened. No, that's not the way reality unfolds. So there's no place for us to get in on the action and supersede the laws of physics and allow something about our will to be determined by to determine what goes forward. It just doesn't work that way. And so the sensation of making a decision to move the cup, it's a real sensation, but that's all that it is, a sensation. The motion that's happening here, this is all guided by the laws of physics.
And I think the success or a theory depends mainly on what are the fundamental elements of the universe and making a good definition of them and how the role they play. What do you think are the fundamental elements of the universe? Is it matter, is energy, is information, is time?
I don't know the right vocabulary. Certainly historically, we spoke about just material objects in aggregate. And then as we understood them better, we spoke about molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. And that's the language that we use today, together with the laws of quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. But will we one day find that a better language is to talk about the information content in the particles that build up a structure? Possibly. Certainly the studies of black holes are suggesting that information is a vital concept. Is it the fundamental concept? We don't know yet. So I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't know what language we'll ultimately use, but I feel confident that there is a language and that there is a structure where we will say one day, these are the principles that at rock bottom define physical reality. And at that point, we will be staring at the deep and fundamental truths.
Related with this, mathematics are discovered or are invented by humans. Are there fundamental tools or fundamental elements in the universe that we can call them the rules of the universe, like mathematics?
Yeah, so it's a deep question that I've gone back and forth on over the years myself. There was a time that I was more in the favor of the math is out there, the laws are out there, and it's just for us to discover them. I now say it somewhat differently. I now gear and I'm more on the perspective of we invent the mathematics, we invent the laws in order to describe what fundamentally we see in the external world. Will there be a point when the invention is so tightly aligned with the reality that we can conflate them? I'd like to think that there may be a time when the distinction between what we invent and what we discover is meaningless because we have gotten so deep in our description. But if you were to push me right now to say, do I think the math is out there and the laws are out there? I would say no. What we're doing right now is we have these pattern-attuned brains that try to look out in the world and find regularities that we can articulate. Math is our best language for articulating regularities, and so we invent mathematical ideas in order to have an efficient framework for encapsulating the patterns. And so I think we make it all up. That doesn't mean it's not valuable. We have made up the laws of quantum electrodynamics and been able to predict the magnetic moment of the electron to 10 decimal places. So it's not fantasy. This is connected to reality, but I think it's the narrative we tell. It's a language that we use to tell that narrative. That's what mathematics is.
So we have a universe that has some rules, patterns, and then again we have a quantum world, and it looks that there is some similarity with a computer.
Yeah.
How do you feel with these theories? Wolfram has a theory that is like a something like a computer. How do you feel with these simulation theories?
Well, look, I mean, if you consider the history of ideas, every time we've developed a new technology, we tend to use that as the metaphor for how the world works, right? In ancient times, when you had gears and levers, people began to think, oh, the cosmos, it's just a collection of gears and levers. And then you go forward and we invent these wonderful contraptions, these clocks, these intricate mechanical structures. And then we have the clockwork universe. That's how we describe things. And then when we start to think about thermodynamics and the steam engine, we developed the second law of thermodynamics. And then we start thinking about the universe as just a thermodynamic system running down over time. The metaphor is determined by the technology. Then we get to computers. So naturally we begin to think, oh, the universe, just a big computer. That's all that it is. And so it doesn't mean that these metaphors aren't important. They are. But I think when you see it in context, you feel a little bit more like, well, when the next big technological breakthrough happens, that will be the new metaphor. So do I think that Wolfram and this idea of computation as the fundamental architecture of reality, is there something to it? There is. I mean, the universe clearly is chugging forward in a way that feels analogous to the way a computer can chug forward step by step. But, you know, the universe would be a quantum computer, no doubt. And so that really seemingly would be the right framework as opposed to a classical computer. But ideas of reducibility in terms of computational reducibility, those things that you can compute really quickly and effectively versus computational irreducibility, those things that you just have to go through step by step by step, are these important ideas that certainly Wolfram has incorporated into his thinking? Yeah, I think they are important ideas, but do I think that the be-all and end-all physics will ultimately be some cellular automaton that's going step by step? I think it may give insight. I don't think it's the final answer.
The theory itself is evolving, and the future will have something new. What do you think of present feature that will be in present theory that will be in the future theories?
I don't know. I really don't know. I like to think that if we come back and have this conversation in 1,000 years, the language may be radically different. I like to imagine that it may not even be mathematical. I like to imagine that, you know, if we make contact with aliens who are 10,000 years ahead of us, and they come down and they say, show us what you've been doing to understand the world, and we bring out our, you know, Meissner, Thorne, and Wheeler gravitation so they can see general relativity, or, you know, your favorite quantum field theory textbook. I like to think that they'll look at that and smile and say, math, we tried that. It only goes so far. But the real language for understanding the universe is this. And they provide us something that's radically different that we've never even considered. I have no idea what that would actually be. I have no idea what it would be that wouldn't be isomorphic to mathematics in some hidden way, because I'm limited in my creative thinking in order to describe the universe. But I'd like to think that this is provisional, and that one day the true reality will be articulated in a different way.
But the universe definitely is really weird. I think you agree.
By weird, if you mean counter to our intuition, yeah, I mean, what do we consider weird? Weird is when it's unexpected. And so, yes, our intuition is based on phenomenon that take place on scales that we can directly observe. And our brains evolved over the course of, you know, a few 100,000 years to understand the everyday, because the brain ultimately is a survival-based gadget, right? Those things that allow us to win in the battle for survival are the things that our brain becomes well attuned to understanding. The brain doesn't need to understand electrons or quarks, doesn't need to understand black holes. They have no impact on our survival. And so I would be more surprised if the universe wasn't weird. Why would the physics of the everyday be at all relevant to the physics of the very small or the very big. There's no reason why that would be the case. And so the fact that the physics of the very small seems to violate our intuition, i.e., is not the physics of the everyday, that makes sense to me. That the physics of the very large, black holes and so on, is not the physics of the everyday, that makes sense to me too. So I'm glad that our intuition is violated. I'm glad the world is weird. That makes a lot of sense to me.
And how you're thinking to make string theory, quantum theory, meaningful? I mean, for example, these experiments of retarded choice and do you think reality exists outside of us? Do you think?
I wouldn't say that reality exists outside of us. I think that's another wonderful example of the ways in which experience is misleading, because you don't have quantum phenomenon manifest on everyday scales, right? These two cups, you know, could they be entangled in some sense? Sure, in some pristine laboratory experiment, maybe we could, but it's too hard. There are too many particles. There's too much environmental influence. But if you get down to the level of individual electrons, can they be quantum entangled? Yes, we do that now in the laboratory all the time. It violates our intuition because we don't experience it on the everyday scale. So again, I'm totally unsurprised that the microscopic world is totally surprising. That's the way it should be.
But how you make it compatible with experience? I mean,
I don't think you can. Unless, you know, we can have some virtual reality experience that we say, put kids in since they're 2 months old. And in this virtual world, we have all the phenomenon of quantum physics taking place all the time. That individual, this is probably child abuse or something like that, but that individual would grow up with quantum as part of their actual experience. And so entanglement would be second nature to them. And quantum tunneling would be second nature because in that virtual world, they would have experienced it all the time. And so since we are not in that world and we don't experience it all the time, it's not second nature, it's not intuitive. And so hoping to make it intuitive, I think, is the wrong direction, because intuition is built up from experience and we don't experience these phenomena.
And about the multiverse, is it possible to test it? And how do you feel about it? Do you, if you have to bet if the universe has these kind of things?
Yeah, so betting is a tricky word because you need data to really determine, you know, what's likely and what's not. And again, we don't have any data. But could we test in principle the multiverse? Yes. There are ideas that the other universes, say in inflationary cosmology, one approach that yields many universes, where you have inflationary expansion yielding our universe, and then the fuel that drives that can yield other universes, yielding a big cosmic bubble bath of universes. Well, those universes in principle can collide with each other. And those collisions can yield, in principle, observable signals in the microwave background radiation. We've not seen those signals, so it's not like we can sit here and say we've got data or circumstantial data that suggests these ideas. No, we're not at that point. But I like this idea because it shows that, fundamentally speaking, other universes is not fundamentally divorced from observation. In principle, there are ways in which we might test these ideas. Whether we will be successful, I don't know. But that means we're doing science. We're not doing metaphysics.
What's wrong with time? Is it okay, time? I mean...
Well, I think we need a deeper understanding. There are basic questions that we've yet to address, such as, is there an actual beginning to time? Is time a concept that only comes into existence in certain environments? Could there be other environments out there where the conditions are not right for a concept of time to be applicable? Could there be a spaceless realm, a timeless realm? These are ideas that we can investigate mathematically. They're hard to think about, but we don't yet have the answers. Could it be that time is, again, just concept that we invent in order that we can organize our perceptions, but the universe has no built-in conception of time fundamentally? Is that the way it is? These are basic questions that we do need to address, and we've not addressed them yet. So we'll see where it goes.
And how do you feel with philosophy? There are many scientists, physicists that they criticize philosophy. How do you feel with it? How does it affect your work?
Yeah, so I certainly have colleagues who disdain philosophy. I have colleagues who say philosophy is a waste of time, that philosophers who try to have relevance to science are somehow failed scientists. This is nonsense.
Hawking as well.
Well, yes, I'm not saying that famous people haven't made remarks along these lines. I think they're completely wrong. The best of the philosophers who work on questions of science, in my experience, understand the scientific ideas more deeply than many of the scientists. True, maybe the scientists can do more fancy calculations than, say, the philosophers can, but the philosophers, the good ones, can look to the inside of those calculations and say, whoa, you better really rethink what you're doing here, because that's not on firm foundation. I don't know what it means when you talk about taking a measurement in quantum mechanics. I don't understand what you mean by talking about time has a beginning. What are you talking about? What does that mean? And I have certainly found that conversations with philosophers have made me rethink my own understanding of things that I've been calculating with for decades. And so it is vital to have philosophers part of this conversation, because they are the ones that can really look at the structure, the framework, the architecture of the ideas, shake them, twist them, kick them, and find the loose locations that require us to think more deeply.
What do you think, or for you, the meaning of the Sagan said, like a quote, that we are the way, the universe, to understand the particles, or itself, the universe itself. What is the meaning of this sentence for you?
It's poetic. I like it, but to me it attributes a rationale, a thought process, an intrinsic purpose to the universe itself. And I don't think that's the case. I think that's, again, a very human urge. We want the universe to be our partner. We want the universe to somehow matter to us, but also us to matter to it. And I just don't think that's the case. I think the cold reality is the universe just is. Many questions that we've yet to address, but I don't think we're going to find some fundamental meaning or purpose in the external world. The universe just is. And we are some temporary agglomerations of matter that happen to come together for reasons that we're still trying to figure out. And when we emerge, we naturally ask ourselves, how did we get here and what's the meaning of it all? But that's a human question. The universe says, again, I'm attributing a voice to the universe, that's a problem, but the universe says, the universe doesn't really care. It's just stuff governed by laws, and it just churns on forward. And so this notion that the universe exists for us, to be able to be the eyes and ears of the universe, poetic, but I don't think there's anything to it.
In your books, you explain really clearly and profoundly the beginning of the universe, and this I really like it because it's linked with the particle physics and Higgs boson and everything. But before that, I never read about any work of you of this time before the Big Bang. Have you ever tried or work on that?
I've certainly thought a lot about it, this question of whether the Big Bang is the start of everything, or maybe it's just the start of a little region of reality that we inhabit, and the larger reality could be much bigger and could have existed perhaps far longer into the past than our Big Bang. But I can't really say anything convincing about that. There are theories that are now being developed by people like Paul Steinhardt, imagining that there are cycles of reality, and our Big Bang is just one cycle in many cycles that could persist very far into the past. Interesting set of ideas. But again, it's all very tentative. We don't know if any of these ideas are correct, but I don't see any reason fundamentally why our Big Bang should be the beginning of it all. I can certainly imagine that there's some notion, maybe even not a temporal notion, of a realm of reality that existed independently of our expanding realm. I allow that as a real possibility.
And time travel?
Well, we do it all the time, right? You know, every time we move, time for us is elapsing at a different rate compared to someone who's in motion relative to us, and that fractures our clocks. In a sense, it puts us in their future or them in our future only by fractions of a fraction of a billionth of a second, so we don't notice it. But that notion of time travel is with us right now, and if you were to achieve speeds near the speed of light, Einstein says that these temporal differences could be large. They could be years or thousands of years or millions of years. And so there's no fundamental obstacle to that sort of time travel, going into somebody else's future. The past is a different story. And so, yes, time travel is absolutely real, but will we harness it technologically to be able to jump thousands or millions of years into the future? It all depends. Can we build ships that go near the speed of light and have accelerations that the body can withstand and decelerations that we can, and then come back? These are technological issues that one day, sure, maybe we will harness them. Maybe one day we'll be able to undertake that kind of time travel.
Finally, most of the audience, they are teenagers from Latin American countries.
Sure.
And many of them, they admire people like Maldacena or Miguel Alcubierre.
Well worthy of admiration.
Yeah. So my question would be, can you explain a little bit about Maldacena's work and conjecture?
Yeah.
And also Miguel Alcubierre, you know him?
Who?
Miguel Alcubierre, the
Yes,
warp
of course.
drive.
Yeah, warp drive stuff. Yeah.
If you can
So I know
say-
less about the warp drive stuff in detail. You know, it's all about could we harness time travel in some interesting ways. So let me leave that one to the experts on that. But in terms of Juan Maldacena's work, sure, Juan perhaps has contributed the most important insight in the last 30 years in string theory. He's a very mild-mannered, very nice person. His contributions are spectacular, and yet he's still very humble about it, which is a nice combination. But he showed, or argued, I should say, that there is this principle which tells us that physics in a region of space is equivalent to physics on the surface of that region of space. We like to think of it as a hologram. Often it's called the holographic principle, which is an apt description because remember what a hologram is. You have a thin piece of plastic, which when you illuminate it the correct way yields a three-dimensional image. And so basically Juan is saying that this three-dimensional world that we inhabit would be equivalent to a two-dimensional world that's smeared on the boundary of that region. He came to it by thinking about string theory in the context of black hole physics, but we think it's a very general result that Juan has provided, which is that physics in any region, an n-dimensional region, is equivalent to physics on an n-1 dimensional boundary region that encapsulates that space. The beauty of this is that physics in the volume involves gravity, right? Here we are in the volume. Gravity matters. The physics on the boundary does not involve gravity. It only involves quantum mechanics. And that's deep because it's telling us that gravity in some sense may emerge in a volume from quantum physics on the boundary. Quantum physics may be the fundamental architecture of reality, and gravitational physics may simply be a manifestation of that quantum physics in the volume.
Wow.
And that's important because, as we've known, putting gravity in quantum mechanics is difficult, and this relates back to the point I made earlier that quantum physics may already have gravity in it. It may not be a matter of quantizing gravity, and may that gravity and quantum mechanics may be so fundamentally connected that they're already part of the same architecture, and this comes out of Juan's ideas.
But it is still a conjecture.
It's still a conjecture. I don't think anybody challenges the truth of this conjecture any longer because the calculations that have been done to test this conjecture, a mountain of data, mathematical data, where you do a calculation of something in the volume, and then you do a calculation of something else on the surface that should describe the same result, and you get the same answer from radically different calculations. And so, example after example, they've worked, giving us more confidence and more confidence every calculation.
Do you know who is Messi? Messi? The
football player, yeah.
So we could say that Maldacena is kind of Messi of
There you
physics.
go, yes, I would agree with
or
that.
The Pope. Or
yeah, that's
the
right.
Pope is Argentinian.
A Pope, maybe some people would take exception to that, but yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Professor.
Thank you.
Pues muchas gracias, como decía Brian Greene, a Starmus y a todas las personas que lo han hecho posible. Yo me quedo además con los libros bien firmados por él, que sumo a la colección, porque ya tengo libros firmados de Kip Thorne, de Michio Kaku y de otros grandes científicos que para mí ya son parte de mi joya de biblioteca personal. Pues ahora sí que me despido, espero que le den mucho al coco y estudien, que alguno de ustedes pues el próximo Brian Greene. Nos vemos como siempre en el próximo vídeo, piratillas. Hasta pronto.